Welcome to the Solo Mo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, and tactics related to social, local, and mobile marketing. Our goal is to help you understand these topics so you can integrate them into your own marketing efforts. Today is July 3rd, 2012, and this is episode number 26.
In this episode, we'll take a deep dive into the world of Google, looking at the announcements made during the Google I/O conference, what you need to know about how Google changes will affect the way you market and advertise, and what the future looks like for Google. We'll also look at recent changes to Foursquare and how you should be positioning your business on the network.
All right, so Adam, one bit of news that you pointed out to me, which I think is awesome, actually, is that this is our, what do you want to call it, half-year mark, the half anniversary?
Yeah, I don't know. Is there like I'm trying to think was there a word for like a half a year or something? Is that biannual? No?
I don't know, it's something like that. And I think it's, the torn paper? If 1 year is paper, this would be like the sticky note anniversary.
Yeah, we got 26 episodes. We've done one every single week. I know you and I are both, just like everybody else out in the world, are busy and have things to do, but we've done a pretty awesome job, I think, of making sure that every single week we make time to do these episodes. And every episode, we record around an hour, give or take, but really it takes a bit more time out of the week than just that 1 hour, obviously, in order to make sure everything is edited and we've got our notes prepared and the whole 9 yards. So I think we've done pretty good.
Yeah, I would say so as well. I think we've learned quite a bit over these past 26 weeks, and it's probably showing up in the quality of the show as well. I'm sure if you went back and listened to episode 1, it would be pretty entertaining to listen to, because we didn't really have as structured of a format as we have now. We didn't have all the process in place, and so hopefully the shows continue to improve, and it'll be exciting to see where we're at 6 months from now. So time has flown by, but it's been a very fun ride along the way, and I think we've created quite a thing here. So well done to us. Virtual
Pretty soon we'll be there. You go. That's just boom in the Google Hangout, and pretty soon we'll be celebrating our 1 year anniversary. I don't know how we're going to end up doing it, but we can. You guys out there listening can give us some ideas on how to celebrate that.
There you go. All right. Well, enough meta discussion. Let's dive right into the good stuff. So, as you mentioned, it seems like a pretty good opportunity to talk about the world of Google. We did a Apple-focused show a couple weeks ago, but then Google had their I/O event, and tons of announcements, tons of news coming out of the Google camp, and Google is a huge player in a number of spaces. The social online world, the advertising marketing world, the gadget world. There's a number of things that happen during a conference like Google I/O, so it seemed like a good chance to just catch up with all things Google and talk about some of the recent changes and see what maybe lessons should be taken for marketers out there.
You say, hey, there's a lot of things that happen, but in my opinion, I think more happened at this Google conference, developers conference, than I think has happened at any of the conferences out there in the past. I think everybody's always mentioned the cool things happening with this device or a little bit with their operating system if you're really a hardcore developer. But similar to the Apple conference that we covered a couple of weeks ago, there really is some widespread changes happening and some things that are really having implications across a lot of different areas in the industry, which we'll end up getting to in just a little bit.
So with that, let's dive right in. So one of the more interesting aspects coming out of Google I/O was the sharing of data. So Google, sometimes they play numbers a little close to the chest, but this was a chance for them to talk about numbers and specifically talk about numbers related to Google+. So that's what we're going to start off with today as our weekly kind of infographic stat of the week. So the numbers that they shared, and we'll just run through them quickly and then kind of talk about the implications of those. So at this point, they announced that 250 million users have signed up, which, that's an impressive number. I think Facebook shortly is going to approach 1 billion users, which is just an astronomical number, but in just a little over a year, signing up 250 million or a quarter of a billion users is an impressive feat. And it is a short jump from having a Google account to having a Google Plus account, but, still they've got a large number of people signed up. And the more important number, I think, is actually the fact that they said 150 million of those users are monthly active users. So these are people that do something related to Google Plus. And that's where the number gets a little bit vague, because they haven't really defined monthly active. Like if you click 1+1 button the entire month, does that put you in that camp? Probably does. So that number maybe is a little bit inflated, but then jumping down another level, they actually said that 50% of users sign in to Google Plus daily. So now we're getting to actual meaty numbers. So 75 million people sign into Google Plus each day. And this is, these are likely dedicated users. And it's not, I think Facebook has like 500 million people that sign in every day. It's not that number just yet, but still 75 million is nothing to sneeze at. So I think that's an impressive number, and potentially indicating a shift in the way that people are just interacting with Google Plus in general is the fact that they said more users access Google Plus on a mobile device than through a desktop. So they've got more people logging in on their Android or their iPhone, checking their Google Plus, maybe posting a stat. And it also talks to the way that people use Google Plus. They're using it on the go. They're using it to post thoughts. And, it's sort of an extended version of the way people use Twitter a lot, which is, hey, I'm out and about, I have something I want to share, what's the quickest way to do it? It looks like people are actually starting to reach for Google Plus for that type of content. And then for those users that are actually getting involved in Google Plus, they said the average user spends 12 minutes a day, quote, in stream. So looking at the Google Plus flow of information, stories, news, photos, videos, the whole, Google Plus experience, the average user is spending 12 minutes a day, and that's actually up from 9 minutes just a couple of months ago. So
wasn't it like 3 months not too long ago that we also covered?
Yeah, I think a couple of months ago we were talking about, similar numbers, and it's still, they're still a little bit vague, but they're getting more concrete and more usable. And, I think these are positive numbers. They're not outstanding numbers, but at the same time, you got to keep in mind Google Plus is a year old, and Facebook and Twitter are, 3 to 5 years old. And actually, I think a little older than that at this point. So, for something that's just out of the gate, its use is increasing, and I think we'll actually get to a couple of other Google Plus related stories later on in the episode. But what's your take on these numbers, Adam? Do you think these are positive signs for Google Plus? Do you think that they're still being a little cagey with the numbers, and maybe they sound a lot more impressive than actual usage statistics would indicate? Or what's your take on the numbers overall?
Well, I mean, I'm glad that they broke it down to, for instance, the monthly active user and also the folks that go on a daily basis. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily too far-fetched, considering the fact that Google has millions upon millions upon millions of users around the web, simply because they've got a ton of other products. So they've, it's not like Google accounts, they were invented specifically for Google Plus. They've been used on all kinds of other Google products for years and years. So it's really more about like converting those users and making them aware and kind of compelling them to say, look, I want to actually participate, in a social network. And they've got the reach to kind of invite those folks because of those previous products. So I don't say that necessarily surprises me. With that said, I'm still in a long run bullish on Google Plus. I don't know whether, I mean, I think that they've iterated quite quickly. I think some of the new things that they've added over the last couple of months, some of which we'll get to talk to in a little bit, kind of are quite interesting. I think they still have done a few things, again, that we'll cover when we talk about those topics in a minute, that they've screwed up a little bit. And we'll talk about that, as I said. But they're not screwing up, to be honest, I believe, any less than, say, a Facebook has screwed up in the past. And I think because of again, that tie-in with those existing products, their velocity can be potentially faster than Facebook's. I don't necessarily think that they are going to beat Facebook in what Facebook is doing, because we've already talked about how much Facebook has permeated the entire web with what it's doing with its actions and Facebook sign in and all kinds of other stuff. but I don't think they need to beat Facebook in order to make a valuable network. How about you?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the statement, they don't need to beat Facebook to be valuable, especially to this audience, is important to keep in mind. They don't have to be the number one social network. You can be a very strong number two social network and have tens and hundreds of millions of users like we're seeing. And, you know, I think that seeing the numbers trending up and to the right is positive. I think if you saw, you know, hey, a couple months ago, people were spending 9 minutes on the site and now they're down to 6 or 3. I think that would be a little worrisome, but the users that are there, they're spending more time, they're posting more things, and you know they're testing out, they're seeing what works, and they're optimizing the site and they're learning lessons. And I think that there's the chance that maybe Facebook is starting to overstay its welcome, and some users are exploring other opportunities. And really, right now, the only other opportunity is Google Plus. There's not a lot of there isn't like, oh, there's 17 social networks out there and people come and go. It's like there's Facebook and there used to be nothing and now there's Google Plus. So if Facebook does take a turn, I could see Google Plus being the place that people jump to pretty quickly. So something to...
how long did it take Twitter to really, hit that tipping point? It took a few years, right?
Yeah, and some people would argue that it hasn't even really reached that tipping point, that Twitter is the active play toy of this tech, hyper techy social person that's sharing everything. But for the mainstream user, they're like, Twitter what? I don't, a couple of tweets show up in some of the shows that I watch on TV, but I have no interest in posting to the network. So I think that it's interesting just looking at the data compared to what you could make use of out of that network compared to what the mainstream perceives towards that network. There's a lot of things to weigh here that just raw numbers don't necessarily incorporate.
So with all that said, we really just kind of hit the tip of the iceberg with Google Plus. I mean, there's a lot of other things going on that kind of are part of that greater ecosystem that were announced at Google I/O, which is the developers conference for Google and all of its products and services. So with that said, Corey, you want to dive into the first thing that we'll cover that was kind of the big topic over at I/O?
Sure, but it's going to be tough to have the big topic because I think there's a bunch of interesting things that were announced. But maybe we'll start with the Nexus 7 tablet. And Adam, my guess is that you, as a major hardcore Apple fanboy, hated the Nexus 7 tablet. You went out and you spray painted anti-Nexus slogans on the walls of buildings and tried to burn down the Google office. Is that correct? Am I?
I cannot. I am not legally allowed to comment on that.
The trial is still pending, huh?
Yeah, actually, in fact, I don't know. You tell me if you're surprised, but I already pre-ordered a Nexus 7.
I did not take the jump, partly just because I wanted to wait it out a little bit. It's not something that I'm in this huge rush to purchase. I've got an iPad that suits all of my tablet needs, so I was like, well, I'll wait and see what the reviews come in at. But for $200, I think there's a lot of people that are going to be in that camp of, shoot, I'll just buy one to play around with it. And just to take a quick step back, so the Nexus 7 tablet was the first official Android tablet being produced by Google themselves. So there's been plenty of tablets out there. There's the Samsung products, and a lot of companies have said, oh, we make this Android tablet, but it's been, it's a third-party thing where somebody's taking the Android system, they're applying it to their own hardware. It hasn't been a Google-sanctioned thing. So this is Google's first move into the tablet space. They came out with a 7-inch tablet. It's priced at $200, so that's, matches the current price for the Amazon Kindle Fire. They positioned it, in my opinion, kind of as a media consumption device. So they talked about, now in the Google Play Store, you can get magazines, you can get movies, you can really get all of this media that you can then consume on the tablet, which, again, mirrors what you're seeing with the Amazon Kindle Fire. So in my mind, I think they positioned it kind of as a competitor to Amazon and the Kindle Fire, not necessarily as a competitor to the iPad, which was really interesting. And, I think probably a smart move. It's tough to take on the iPad at this point because people, they don't tablet shop. They just go and get an iPad. There is no like consideration set. So what they looked at is, hey, Amazon's selling a lot of this size device. There seems to be a gap in the market that Apple currently isn't competing. So rather than directly compete, let's come up with a different type of device, market it for a different type of user, and see if there's a hole we can fill. And I think there's going to be, a lot of people rushing out and saying, hey, this is an Android device that I can get. It's cheap enough that I can just test it out, play with it, see what the Android system is all about, and maybe I like it, maybe I don't, but it's not this huge financial commitment the way that buying an Android phone would be, and having to get the contract that comes along with it. So, Adam, what pushed you over the edge and made you decide to pick up one of these Nexus 7 tablets?
Well, I mean, the simple fact, right? It's $200. Actually, this is my thoughts on it. And thankfully, there were a lot of good reviews that came in quick enough that gave me a little bit of more confidence in the purchase. But so I purchased a Kindle Fire for my wife. It's the first ever Android device that we've ever purchased. We're a big Apple family. And it was cool. $200, but underwhelming in the overall grand scheme of things. Like using the operating system a bit, it just felt kind of underpolished and so on. But I said, hey, $200. My wife can read books on there. That's pretty much what she was using it for. And in fact, other than reading books, she really didn't find it a compelling thing for her to do much else on. She'd rather grab her laptop, for instance, when she's getting on Facebook or something like that. With this tablet, then it's really the new operating system, which is codenamed Jelly Bean. It has a lot of polish, and we'll actually talk about a couple things that have come up with Jelly Bean and the operating system a little bit more in a second. But the operating system, I think, has finally just started to hit that point where it's going to mature, and where that maturity is going to make it more compelling for users who really go to iOS, not just because they enjoy using Apple as part of their Apple ecosystem, but because the operating system and everything just feels responsive, and it feels good, and it feels polished and such. So I think Android, after all these years, might finally be kind of turning that corner. I think so for me, it was more about, I want to see this device. I have an iPad. I love it. It's not going to make a difference with me using the iPad. The iPad is an almost 10-inch tablet, whereas this is, again, it's like a 7-inch tablet. But it's going to give me an opportunity as somebody who, is doing mobile marketing and even design and all those sorts of things, to really get a chance to put myself waist deep in the Android pool, so to speak. Well,
that's probably one of the bigger takeaways for our audience, especially, right, is that this thing's probably going to sell in huge volume. So the reason that it's priced at $200 is Google's basically like giving the thing away. They've all but admitted the fact that this thing costs them $200 to make. They sell it for $200. On top of that, they're giving away $25 to the Google store. So they're basically like losing money on every device. But because of that, people are like, well, I'm buying like a $300, $400, $500 device for $200. I'm getting a deal. I'm going to try it out. I'm going to test it. And so suddenly, like, this Android ecosystem, there's going to be a lot of people there. And so, if you're a company that's big enough to be doing significant, mobile and tablet size development, I think it's almost a must that you pick up one of these tablets and just test out. What does your website look like? What does your, consumer touch points look and feel like when they're used on a device like the Nexus 7 tablet?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And to kind of even go back a little bit to what you were saying about them kind of competing with Amazon, they're really competing on multiple fronts, right? They know that it would be very, very hard for them at this moment to really compete side by side with the iPad. But what they've done with this, like you were saying, it's going to be sold at a loss. But the reason it's sold at a loss is because right now they're finally coming into their own with an actual full-on ecosystem and marketplace. So they're going essentially head-to-head primarily with Apple with that. So now you've got a place that you can buy both apps and movies and books and magazines. And so you've got and music, right? So you have this entire place, this entire marketplace where, for instance, in the past, you couldn't sell your magazine or your publication through through Google really in any great way. They had it kind of fragmented all over the place, and now they brought it all into one marketplace. And I think they were really doing their darndest to push it with the new Nexus tablet and saying, look, this is a place where you, like you said, it's a consumption device. Buy this stuff. Take $25 in credit and see what it's like to actually explore the content that we have available in Google Play. This is going to make, Amazon to some extent, right? I mean, their app store for the most part are Android apps, so that it's feeding into the whole Android ecosystem. They have their movies and music and even their books. But that's what I think Google is really kind of in a way positioning themselves between those two players, Apple and Amazon. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting now to see them put this out and say this is really more of a gateway to. I mean, Apple kind of went away, did this with their business model where they said, we're going to make a lot of money off of selling apps, right? And then suddenly, so they give you a device for this much money, knowing that they're going to sell over the lifetime of that application potentially $100 or $200 or $300 worth of content. I mean, in my case, much more than that, unfortunately. But I mean, people buying apps and other stuff. It's a gateway to buying content from their marketplace, and I think this is the real first time that Google has positioned themselves to really be a contender. And the more that these devices sell, the Nexus 7 sells, and then hopefully, probably move on to another device, whether it be a larger device of the same, kind of quality, then the more they sell, the more opportunity there is going to be to leverage that marketplace for your content. And then subsequently, like you said, if you end up building applications for Android, now you've got a much larger ecosystem out there that is willing to purchase those apps from you.
Yeah, and the other thing that this signals, and it doesn't, it's not the start of the signal, it's more the end of the signal, but if you're a marketer and an advertiser and you're paying attention, you've got to be aware of the shift to these mobile devices. And, I think one thing to keep in mind is when you're on a tablet or you're on, an iPhone, you're typically not just browsing the internet. You're using applications, and that's the way that you're interfacing with content. And so if you're trying to reach this online audience and you're only doing it through, the traditional kind of web banner advertising purchase, you're going to, quickly start to lose a large part of your audience that's reading through apps, they're watching, content, videos, that type of stuff through apps. Their entire world is going to start existing inside of this app ecosystem. And so if your advertising plan and your advertising mediums don't include some sort of app marketing, you're just going to start to miss out. So I think it's important, especially now with, you've got Google jumping into the tablet market. You've got even Microsoft jumping into the tablet market. The shift is happening. People are moving into these tablet devices, and with that, they're also moving into an app-based experience. So start experimenting with some of these app-based advertising platforms that are out there, because I think it's going to be important to understand them, to figure out how to target the audience that you've previously targeted online, and look at where they're going for their application experience on the tablet market as well, and figure out how to reach them in this new medium.
Yeah, so speaking of that and the whole kind of interaction now with the apps and the operating system and all that kind of stuff, we alluded to the new operating system for Android, which is called Jelly Bean, and it looks pretty awesome in the sense that they've done some polish. They've really focused on that polish more than they did on creating some huge earth-shattering changes, similar to what Apple did a while back with their operating system when they jumped to Snow Leopard. Mm-hmm. They did a bit of polish there, and I think the jump between iOS 4 and 5, I think was, again, there was some really cool features like notifications and such, but there was some additional kind of smooth polish that was happening. Jelly Bean, the problem with the difference between, say, iOS and Android operating system for the most part is beyond the inherent differences is the fact that most people do not upgrade to the latest Android operating system. They aren't necessarily always aware of it. And also, not all devices, I believe, are really capable of always handling the upgraded operating system because of such fragmentation, where with Apple, for the most part, from a certain device on up, meaning like from an iPhone 3G and up, or an iPhone 3GS and up, the hardware can handle you upgrading the operating system, and it's only one operating system and only one set of devices. Whereas with iOS, there's just this fragmentation all over the place, and some devices can handle the newer operating systems, and some of them can't. So that
I actually heard a very interesting stat related to that. So Ice Cream Sandwich, the operating system that existed before Jelly Bean, just crossed the 10% threshold. So 10% of Android devices are now on Ice Cream Sandwich. I think it took them like 6+ months to get there. There are actually some Apple sites who, through their user logs, they can tell that 8% of their online audience is browsing the site through iOS 6. So Apple, with an operating system that hasn't even been released yet, is already at 8% adoption rate through people, beta testing and trying out the operating system and developing.
You're one of them, huh?
I'm one of them. I'm using iOS 6, and it's skewed a little bit. This was sites that cover Apple news, so of course it's going to be Apple developers and Apple fanboys and people that are higher up on that adoption curve. But just looking at the fact that an operating system that isn't even out yet is almost caught up to an operating system that's been out for 6 months just highlights, I think, some of that fragmentation problem. So it's interesting. I think Google they continue to try to figure out ways of getting their operating system onto devices earlier and onto older, more legacy devices, but it is a challenge, and it's a challenge for a number of reasons that we could fill an entire show with. But something to pay attention to is that, as we talked about before, developing for the the Android ecosystem, you really have to understand some of those unique aspects of the operating system and, of these changes that happen from OS to OS, but, not every user is going to get those right away the way that maybe an iOS update would.
Yeah, and so one of the things, though, that they did end up adding to the new operating system that I think would be a bit tempting for folks and is kind of interesting is something called Google Now. And Google Now is kind of Google's answer to Siri on iOS devices. Siri, for the most part, is like a virtual assistant. You ask it questions or to do something or to send a message in via email or a text or something, and it will transcribe it and send it off and, do a lot of cool things for you. Google's now kind of created their version, again, called Google Now, that does much of the same and displays the information quite differently. And from what I remember, it's actually displaying very much information that Google itself, as a search engine, would have, in its databases. It is using a little bit of third-party services, I think you mentioned, right, Corey, for some of the information?
Yeah, so it's basically trying to interpret the types of data you'd be looking for before you even realize you need it. So you open up this Google Now and it's like, hey, I found all this crazy stuff that you might need. It seems like you're walking around. Here's bus stop times and restaurants near you and sports scores for the team in the city that you're in. And it's really neat in the way that they've implemented it. I think it's a sign of Google finally making use of all this data. They're basically, using what they know about you to interpret things that they think you might want to know about. And that's kind of the dream, right? That's the idea that, hey, I've got this computer and it's now an intelligent virtual assistant. It goes out and says, oh, you've got that flight. The flight just got pushed back an hour. You don't need to leave your house just yet. Or, hey, it got pushed back an hour, but there's a traffic jam on the way, so you've got to go now. But, hey, I found you an alternate route, so we're going to do a little bit of moving and shaking here. So, and
it's based on a lot of context, right? I mean, they're really trying to take a lot of context into account to kind of predict the information that you're looking for. So where you are, what time of day it is, and so on, because obviously we're talking about mobile devices. So those mobile devices are traveling with you, as they assume it's traveling with you to work, wherever you're traveling to the airport, like you said, to the back home, and so on. So it's really trying to leverage that whole paradigm, right?
Yeah, and this is a very early look. It's the same as when Siri first came out. There were only a couple of types of searches you could do. It's not doing everything for everyone. It in terms of walking out and about, it's going to try to do things like find you restaurants and bars, but it's not like, oh, I pulled your favorite movies and, I think you'd like this one based on reviews and it's playing at a theater near you. It's not doing that yet, but it is doing things like finding restaurant data. And so, like we talked about with Siri, it's important to understand where that data is coming from and then going there and making sure, if you're a restaurant, you want that data to be accurate. You want to make sure that when Google now recommends that they stop by your restaurant and it says that you're open because it thinks you're open, if that's not the case and you're actually closed and that person shows up at your door and finds a locked door and the lights are off, they're going to be pretty pissed and they're probably not going to return. So you want to make sure that that third-party data is accurate. And I think what they're using is likely Zagat. So Google purchased Zagat and they're pulling in that data. And the same, Apple is relying on Yelp, Google's relying on Zagat. So I think it's important not to just focus on Yelp and say, I'm just going to make sure that Yelp's accurate and then I'm all set. You've got to make sure that all of the major networks that are out there have accurate data, have things like photos that we've talked about before, have your correct hours, especially have a phone number. That's still how a lot of people are going to try to reach you. So go out there, when something like Google Now appears and you notice, hey, it looks like it's pulling data from other sources, I should find out what those sources are and make sure that they're accurate.
Yeah, and so in some instances, this actually feels like it really could be a competitor to Siri, and again, I don't want to completely tear up my Apple fanboy card, so to speak, but I like competition. It pushes the other companies to do interesting things, and so far the competition's been kind of soft. No matter what anybody thinks about the sales of Android devices. But I think that the polish kind of that everything is happening to get both on the hardware side and the software side ends up pushing everybody now to do better things.
So I like that you say polish. Google called that Project Butter, which I think is hilarious. So they're like, oh, we're going to make our operating system faster and smoother. Well, what's faster and smoother? Butter. So they actually called their whole process of getting their operating system optimized Project Butter, which I just thought was a very interesting side note, because it's still, despite the fact that it's this giant company, it still does kind of nerdy, weird, quirky things like calling something Project Butter.
Or jelly bean, or ice cream sandwich, or right. I mean, you think these guys just aren't being fed over at Google and are thinking of all the snacks that they want to have when they're finally done working on the project or something.
Yeah, definitely.
So what do you want to talk about next here?
So, I think it's interesting. You bring up the idea of being an Apple fanboy, and I think that, while we are very Apple positive, I live inside of Gmail. I use Google Calendar as my main calendaring system. I'm a proponent of Google as well. And, one of the things that I think that they do well that no other company really is doing as well as they are is just look forward into the future and get people dreaming about what's possible again. So, they've got this Google X. It's this lab that has mystery projects. They don't even talk about most of them, but it's producing things like the self-driving car. They talked about wanting to create a space elevator. They're the NASA of our generation, which I think is really interesting. And one of those products is Google Glass, and it wasn't announced at I/O, but up until Google I/O, Google Glass was just this thing that Sergey Brin wore around every once in a while, and nobody had really seen it. Nobody had had a chance to play with it. It was this mystery device, and they put out this video, and it's like, okay, so I can talk to myself, and it'll do searches for me, but really hadn't defined it. And so during Google I/O, and I don't know if you got a chance to watch any of the live stream broadcasts, Adam. Did you check any of that?
I didn't watch the live stream, but I saw the video afterwards. You might also want to explain what Google Glass is real quick.
Okay, that'll probably clear this up a little bit. So Google Glass is Google's new take on the way we're going to interact with devices. So it's almost like a pair of glasses, and it actually can incorporate into a pair of glasses if you wear glasses, but it's a little see-through screen that sits just outside of your main field of vision. So it's kind of up and to the right, and to interact with it, you just look up at this device, and it's going to have, data and video, and apparently, it's a full screen kind of in this little glasses-like device that attaches to your head. And the idea is that instead of pulling out your phone, you could just interact with Google Glass. So you could run searches against it. You could, say, hey, what restaurants are around me? And instead of looking at your phone, you would just look up into this Google Glass interface, and it would, it'd have a little text field or have a map or however they're going to end up, interfacing with this thing. That's actually what's interesting is they haven't talked a lot about that. And I think for the reason that it's still a very early kind of prototype device. But the gist of it is it's a new device that aims to either augment or eventually replace your cell phone with a wearable computer interface. Is that a pretty good description of it?
Yep.
All right. So looking into the future, they've got this keynote going on, and they're actually talking about Google Plus. So I'm tuned in. I'm interested. I'm like, all right, I want to get the numbers. I want to see how they're positioning Google Plus. Are they giving it the good college try at selling it, or are they trying to back up a little bit and say, we're trying some things? And right in the middle of it, Sergey Brin walks on stage and he's like, hold on. I got to interrupt this for a second. I got to interrupt the keynote. And I'm watching it. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, this is obviously not rehearsed. Like, everybody else around him is like, what is he doing? He's like, all right, there's 500 ways this could go wrong, but who wants to see me demo Google Glass? And of course, like, everybody's like, yeah, Google Glass. 'Cause, nobody had seen this thing before. And he's
remember, it's a bunch of nerds and geeks just like us, even more so than us over there. So
exactly, bunch of geeks, bunch of nerds. And I thought actually one of the funniest parts is in the live stream, everybody's like kind of paying attention. The second he walked on stage with Google Glass, hundreds of cell phone cameras went up, and everybody was like snapping pictures furiously. So anyways, he's up there on stage. He's like, who wants to see a demo of Google Glass? And, of course, everybody's like, yeah, we want to see it. And he's like, all right, well, we're going to go outside for a second. And it goes up to the screen and cuts to a scene of 6 skydivers in this little, it looks like a plane. And, it's like, what the heck is going on? So he starts explaining. He's like, all right, all 6 of these skydivers are wearing Google Glass. It's such a weird product. It doesn't pluralize very well. They're all wearing their own Google Glass.
Glasses.
I guess so. You could call it Google Glasses. There might be a weird apostrophe. But anyways, they're all wearing Google Glass, and they're all connected into a Google Hangout. And you're starting to put 2 and 2 together, and you're like, wait, are they over San Francisco? So they're in an airship that's floating above Moscone Center where the actual Google I/O conference was going on, and they're all connected through a Google Hangout and some sort of cellular crazy Wi-Fi system. And he's like, all right, we're going to do this. And so they get to the edge of this thing, and they jump out, and you're getting a first-person perspective of this skydive. So they're doing tricks. They thankfully successfully pull out the parachute, and they're under parachute, and they dive down, and they actually land on the roof of Moscone Center. And while this is happening, I'm literally in my office, grabbing people. I'm like, everyone has to watch this. This is crazy. They're skydiving into a conference. So these skydivers land on the roof, and there's a bunch of BMX bikers on the roof. So they hand off this prototype of the Google Glass to these BMX bikers, and those guys jump off ramps, and you're watching this whole thing again.
They do a full backflip over from one section of the roof to the next.
Yeah, they jump from building to building with a backflip. The whole thing being documented by Google Glass. You're getting this first-person perspective. The BMX guys hand it off to this guy who actually rappels down the side of a building. And at this point, everybody's just going crazy because it's nerd overload. You've got skydiving, BMXing, rappelling. The guy rappels down a building. He hands it to another bike guy who then weaves through the Google I/O attendees. And it's actually dangerous. You can see people jumping out of the way because this guy no regard for anybody around him. He's just cruising through, jumps up on stage, and hands this prototype pair of Google Glass to Sergey Brin, who is amazed that this whole thing has worked, and kind of does a little celebration dance. And then everybody jumps up on stage, and they're like, all right, well, that was Google Glass. What do you think? That's awesome, right? And it was the craziest thing I had ever seen. I was almost in disbelief that they had managed to pull it off successfully. There wasn't a single hiccup in the whole thing, which he had said, he's there's 500 ways this could go wrong, and none of those happened. It actually worked incredibly well, which is surprising. And it took Google Glass from this very nerdy, oh, I want to wear a computer on my face, to this thing that skydivers and BMX bikers and all these people could actually get use out of. I thought it was the best product demo slash product debut I had ever seen, and I was incredibly impressed. I have no idea how any company would top that.
Well, and Robert Scoble called it, like one of the best demos ever. He thinks it's like one of the top 3 demos ever. And funny enough is considering how much Google Glass is supposed to be capable of doing in the grand scheme of things, it really didn't show off much more than what it would be to just like strap on a GoPro camera.
Yeah, well, GoPro was actually a co-sponsor of the event, so everybody's wearing GoPro cameras, and when they put the final video out, it's like all GoPro footage, which...
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what it looked like when it was live. I mean, I saw it after the fact, and I heard actually Robert Scoble speaking to one of the guys from GoPro talking about, their involvement, and so... it was one of those things that really blew you away when you're watching it, but at the same time, I mean, it kind of showed you like 5 years from now what it might be, what you might be able to do if you like could get enough Wi-Fi signal up above in an airship and then skydiving and those sorts of things. Because even they said that it was a bit tough actually to do that initially. In fact, actually, they initially said they did a lot of testing, because I read kind of the article about like how they did it, and they didn't go into all the details, but they did say like initially. It was only like 2 weeks or 3 weeks before Google I/O when they finally said, let's go ahead and do this. And they said they did everything from taking a walk, an actual cooking walk, and strapping it to the back of the guy's back to use as kind of like the cellular signal antenna. And finally, they did some stuff that they said was very, very low tech in order to make it happen. But needless to say, I mean, I think really the discussion that we're getting to goes back to wearable devices, right? And how Google is really ushering in something that I think a lot of people think, no, it's not. It's just going to be this geeky thing. But I don't believe that to be the case. I think in most cases we've thought that social media would be a geeky thing, and we've seen it start to flourish, and we've seen even smartphones feel like a geeky thing, and people are finding a lot of uses for it. And actually, in fact, most people don't utilize as much as they could for those devices, but they spend money on them, and they have them a part of their day to day as much as they would have their wallet and keys in their pocket. And so we've seen other products, like we discussed the Pebble a while back, and some other devices that are connected devices that are augmenting what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. They're connected to networks and can bring up data and all this. And this is kind of almost like the ultimate one. I mean, the next thing that you could imagine, the next evolution of this is actually getting something actually implanted in your brain and your eyeball and all that stuff. But we're talking something that's just right on your eye. And I think Sergey Brin knows that it looks cool, because quite honestly, he's been growing that beard out, and now he's been wearing black shirts. And so like he suddenly looks like some super spy nerd in comparison to before, where, when he didn't have the facial hair and all that kind of stuff. He knows that it looks kind of cool wearing that thing over his eye as he walks around and stuff. So I think, as with what Apple was doing with the smartphone, and how they've really taken that 5 years ago and pushed that into the public's eye and forced all the competitors to really come out with something great and innovating. I think the same thing is to be said with Google and what they're doing with Google Glass, that they've taken a step, and that they initially made, with their first announcement of Google Glass, it seemed like it just vaporware. Like this was never anything that was meant to actually be released to the public. But they were selling them to developers for $1,500 to a certain subset of developers. So they gave out prototypes to people there and asked them to start developing things. And like you said, it's like a platform, right, where they believe that you could do all the things that a smartphone could do, but do it in a more kind of intimate way, even in a wearable fashion than what a smartphone can do. I don't know whether it would replace a smartphone per se, but it certainly ushers in kind of a new age of I don't know why in my head, like robotics and cybernetics and all this kind of stuff came into my mind, like the universal soldier, but definitely kind of augmenting the average human being with connected devices.
Yeah. And, it's important to keep in mind, we are like incredibly future thinking at this point. The beta product that you had talked about for $1,500, that doesn't even come out until 2013. That's not till next year. And then the consumer-facing product isn't even going to be available until at least a year after that. So, we're talking 2014 and beyond. So this is more just getting the brain churning a little bit on, okay, what would this mean in the future? What is, my 5-year plan going to look like now that a couple years from now we might have, augmented humans walking around with the Google Glass on their face, and, maybe Apple comes up with their version of it or something like that. I think, keeping in mind things like, again, it's just making sure that how people are going to interact with your brand is optimized and is correct and is, putting that good user experience out there is important. And, I don't know that we have any major takeaways for like what you should do now.
I have a takeaway. All right,
I have a
takeaway because this is actually something I've been thinking for quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, especially. The bottom line is there is a layer of information that is now being developed, and it's the layer of information that we are going to, in a big way, as a society around the world, be accessing on a constant basis. And for those out there, those brands and businesses and companies who do not want to be a part of that information, whether it be by contributing to it or just simply making sure that you exist in that layer of information one way, or another, you are essentially non-existent to those users who are leveraging that. And so the folks in the future who are using Google Glass, just like the people currently who are using smartphones, if you decide to opt out of participating in being at least a part of that layer of information that people are accessing. We've talked about if you're a brick and mortar store and you've got information on Yelp and on Google Places and other places, the other things like that. For just to kind of take an example, you do not exist to those people out there currently who are still, a significant but increasing and emerging group of people. And so when we think about 5 years from now and 10 years from now, the information set that we're building up right now is going to essentially be what is, it's kind of like if you're not in the history books, you don't exist. Well, if you're not in this layer of data and this layer of content in a way so that when I'm walking around with, say, Google Glass, or whether it be the next generation of smartphones and using something like Google Now on my Nexus 7, it's providing me context and information not based on made-up information. It's made up on information that actually correlates with people and things and brands and businesses that exist. You have to exist in that layer of data in order to reap the benefits of that, and that the benefits of that are only going to increase from here on out.
I couldn't agree more. I think that is a great takeaway, actually. So I'm impressed. I had no takeaway for Google Glass, but you summed it up quite nicely. Exist awesome. In the layer of data. That is important.
I think you're flattering me by saying summed it up, but so we have a number of things to get to, and we also have a couple interviews that we're going to plan on featuring this in this episode. So I want to make sure that we can get to all the other stuff before we do our famous, hey, we wish we could be under an hour, but we're not going to be.
This
promise.
one, I don't even think we're going to be close on this one. But so maybe we'll quickly go through some of the Google Plus announcements because we alluded to it before. So I want to make sure that we touch on those. And I'll just run through them quickly, and then we can talk about if there are any takeaways, and then we'll get to those interviews that Adam mentioned. So the couple of big Google Plus related announcements. First off, they announced tablet apps for Google Plus, and the one for Android is actually available now. It got announced and was available with Google I/O. The one for iOS, specifically the iPad, is coming soon, but it basically brings Google Plus to every major device category at this point. And I think this could actually really help increase usage of Google Plus. So right now, you're either on your phone or you're on your computer, but there's a bunch of people who, they spend a ton of time on the iPad, and so Facebook's there, Twitter's there, so they're using Facebook and Twitter on their iPad, but they haven't had a chance to use Google Plus. So I think, increasing usage, it's going to be especially great at displaying images. All of the screenshots that they showed when they were debuting this thing were image-focused, huge images, giant thumbnails, so fantastic for displaying images. I think we can, once again, trumpet the horn of become a brand that's good at creating images and is a visual brand, because it's just increasingly important. And, again, exemplified by the fact that Google Plus, available on the tablet, puts a very big focus on images. And then another interesting sort of image-related announcement was Google Plus Events. So they've actually created an events tool inside of Google Plus, with the goal of making, event invitations and actually going to an event a social activity. And the reason I say it has a interesting image element is that each event invite now comes with a selectable cinemagram or cinemagraph, depending on what you want to call it, which is one of those like kind of artsy GIFs. And I thought that was a interesting choice. Like Google has kind of officially solidified the artsy GIF as a way of communicating your brand message. But Google Events, you can invite people. If they accept, it automatically shows up in their Google Calendar. You can then take photos during the event, and that automatically gets shared with all the people that attend that event, which, for personal parties, I think that is great. But one of the opportunities for brands especially is creating an event that you could invite your customers or your users to. So, play around with Google Plus events a little bit, see what opportunities are out there. Maybe you could, do something like a podcast or a live stream and invite people with Google Plus and have them take photos and share content, and all of that will happen automatically. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities there. And then lastly, the Google Plus History API. So this is a set of APIs that Google put out there that's actually going to allow applications to integrate data into the Google Plus system and do it automatically, but kind of creating a data pool that the user can then pick through and share specific pieces of data out of that pool. So, Facebook has really put the focus on frictionless sharing. With Facebook, you sign up, you authorize an app, and everything you do inside of that app just automatically goes out to your friends, whether you want it to or not. And then Facebook says, trust us to pick out the good stuff. What Google's doing is they're allowing applications to automatically broadcast all your data, but it doesn't go public right away. The user then goes through and says, hey, that was a good photo. I did like that check-in. I, want to share the fact that I went to that movie. But the rest of that, ignore that, keep that private. I don't really want to share that. So I think it's interesting giving users more control. I think there's a lot of, value there because, again, not everybody wants the Facebook model of sharing everything. So Google is differentiating themselves or saying, hey, you can be a little more selective here. And Google Plus is a system that you can use to, still share things, but do so on a more selective basis. So those are the three big Google Plus announcements. Again, a tablet app, Google Plus Events, and a Google Plus History API. And it will be interesting to see if those, continue this trend of increased usage of Google Plus in the coming months.
I think it will. And with that said, I think we're going to dive in and play our two interviews that we have. Yeah,
two. And these are actually the final interviews from the Social Loco conference. We had recorded a bunch, and we've, we had both the Social Loco podcast, and then we also had a couple of interviews that have been the last couple of episodes. So this will round out our coverage of the Social Loco event.
So we have one from Tripit.com's Nancy Ramamurthy. And she actually is going to talk about how Tripit's data is being used in all kinds of interesting ways, the potential for the use of social media in the hospitality and travel industry, and all kinds of great, interesting stuff right around there. And then we have Kevin Fleece, I think is how you say his last name, and he's from room77.com. They are an interesting service which he describes on the show about that they help you book not just a hotel room, but a very specific hotel room that you want. They aggregate all the information from and prices and such from hotels.com and a lot of those other places all into one website. But then they also give you context to the exact room, so you can look just kind of like booking your seat at a concert, where you can now go to this diagram of the whole venue you're at and choose exactly which seat you want. Make sure that you're not sitting behind a big pylon or column or whatever like that and blocking and having your view blocked. These guys give you an actual photo or like a virtual tour, so to speak, of an exact room, so you can actually look and pick out if you're that dare I say, picky about your room. So those are two interviews that we're going to play for you in just a second right here. And we'll be back to do our tool of the week and our lightning round. How you doing, everybody? This is Adam and Corey, and we're sitting here with Nancy Ramamurthy, right?
Very good.
All right.
Awesome.
I only practiced 3 times before we before I said it here. And Nancy is the VP of Product Management and Marketing at TripIt, right?
Yes. TripIt, exactly.
Could you tell us a little bit about what TripIt does?
Yeah. For those who don't know TripIt, TripIt's a free service. It instantly organizes all of your travel reservations, activities, everything that you plan on doing during a trip in one place. So it puts it on your phone. So we're on every device that matters. We incorporate social. We make it super easy to share. So it's about removing stress from travel and allowing you to have a good time on your trip.
Gotcha. And social and mobile and all that seems like a pretty natural part of the travel industry, but it also seems like maybe the travel industry has been a little slow to adapt to social and local. So, why do you think that is, and what has TripIt done differently that's kind of set you guys apart?
Yeah. Well, I guess as I think about the travel industry, I think about it's huge, right? It's huge. It's one of the oldest industries, one of the largest industries. So, and it's highly fragmented. We're talking about tens of thousands of suppliers, air, car, hotel, activities, etc. So, we're here we were born and raised in the technology space, correct? So, the challenge is that you've got a ton of companies that are involved in the travel industry, but it's highly fragmented. They don't come from a technology background necessarily. So, I think for those companies to change and to adapt, it's a large challenge. I think a lot of them are finally sort of getting on board with mobile, certainly, at least in the last, let's say, 5 years. The large suppliers, let's say, for instance. But for the long tail, it's still going to take time. So at any rate, so I think when you consider that many traditional sort of travel suppliers and participants have just come on board with mobile, integrating social, integrating location in a relevant way is going to take a little bit more time. And then tightly wrapping those experiences or that technology into an experience that delivers the right value at the right time, the right context, with the right content that a user is going to want at that particular place also takes a certain skill set and mindset. So it is going to take some time. The way that TripIt is trying to enable all of this, though, is that we've always considered ourselves sort of the Switzerland of all your data. So it's the one place that a user controls the information, owns their information, has all their information in one place. I mean, right now it's highly fragmented. Right before TripIt, it's like, okay, the hotel had your hotel view, air had your air view, but there wasn't really one place you could do it unless you manually kind of put it all together yourself. So TripIt pulled it all together, and like I said, we're the Switzerland, and we believe that the users should control and own their data, and be able to make the travel process easier for themselves by giving permission to other companies. So we have an open API, and that API was launched about 3.5 years ago. About 1,500 developers are using it. Avis was the larger sort of supplier that used it more recently, like in the last 6 months, to make the car reservation process a lot easier. So as opposed to re-entering all your information around, okay, here's my flight time, here's when I check in, here's a location. Instead, a user can automatically connect their TripIt account to their Avis account, so that Avis knows and populates all that information automatically.
Yeah. Was the API something that you developed as sort of your own decision, or was that based on feedback from the customers saying, hey, we want to tap into the system and we want to be able to access this?
It was actually our own decision. I think TripIt's always been at the forefront of using technology to solve problems and to delight travelers. And I can't take credit for it. I give full credit to the founders. It was Andy Denmark, Greg Brockway, and Scott Hitz. And they've been innovators in the travel industry for a long, long time. And so this belief that, in the end, so for instance, you can imagine having like a universal travel profile. Scott Hinz used to talk about like a little chip in your body that would that you should be able to automatically sort of go through security, check in at a hotel, and that they would know what your preferences were automatically.
And that's mobile, really, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really your mobile information that goes along with you everywhere that you go, right?
Yeah, it's mobile, but if there's also a way to sort of transparently in the background communicate that to the hotel, to communicate that to the suppliers, so that you don't have to re-enter information in every single time, that they understand your preferences, and that all that should be controlled by the user. That was the fundamental belief. So the API is permission-based. It's our first step towards perhaps like building towards a universal travel portal that you as a user would own.
What are some of the most interesting things that you've seen beyond what you said about Avis in regards to how people have been using your API?
Oh, there's all kinds of cool stuff. There's everything from Memo Lane, which is an app that takes a look at all of your travel or all of your sort of life history, your memories over time, and it incorporates TripIt as a part of that. There's News 360, which actually adapts and delivers you news based on where you're going to be in your travel, so it's relevant local news that's going to happen. There's they're going to kill me, but I've forgotten. There's something that measures the carbon footprint that you're the impact of that based on your travel plans. I mean, there are USA Today delivers local news based on where you're going to be through the itinerary data from TripIt. So there's all types of innovation that happens around TripIt. FlightTrack Pro actually uses our service. It's also sort of our lead competitor, so to speak, with TripIt Pro. But we've got that open API, and we're about driving innovation for the industry. So, wherever it may be, whoever wants to access it, help solve traveler problems, delight users, it's great.
A lot of the things you've been describing sound like, definitely like TripIt has done a lot to become that central platform, whereas everybody else can kind of plug in for this data that which is pretty unique in comparison to a lot of the other services that we find that are, whether they be location or social or whatnot. And so a lot of folks are thinking of you guys as the first resource to go to for that sort of information, huh?
Yep.
Anything interesting on the horizon for TripIt? Where do you think that the travel industry is going to go when it comes to social, mobile, and local?
Wow.
Any big announcements you want to share?
Oh, I know. My PR people would
just suddenly filtering. I can see it happening right now.
I'm really excited about all the stuff that can happen in the future. We've done a great job with mobile. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. We're very early. I think the whole industry is still very, very early. We're in, should I say, 1.5? Maybe we're not even at 2. I'm redefining 1, 2, 3, because I feel like people are starting. They've just gotten mobile. I think we've done a really, really good job with that, but there's still improvements to be made, frankly. And then in terms of incorporating social and some of the newer location-sensitive data, and wrapping that in a super tight experience for travelers, that is still greenfield. I think a lot of it.
You think that you said that a lot of this is permission. All of it is pretty much permission based. So with that said, is there still somewhat of a barrier to getting folks who may be a little worried about their privacy over that initial kind of I'm giving this information, I'm telling people when I'm traveling, that sort of hump?
The way that we handle that, I think there is a natural sort of inhibition, particularly I think for, I hate to stereotype, but let's say older consumers, let's say 35 plus who perhaps didn't grow up with Facebook, where
you may not understand the technology and those.
They're nervous about it. They're worried that someone knows that they're out on a trip and they're going to rob their house. Well, it's like, and it's more likely that someone in your neighborhood will actually see that the lights are off or that the newspapers are gathering, in front of your house, and that's more of a risk. But I think that moving forward, like a lot of that, the privacy issues will start to sort of recede. And the way that we address it though is that we, as I mentioned actually in my panel, we give very fine-tuned control to users over how they want to display that information. So it's always up to you in terms of whether or not you want to publish it automatically, or if you want to publish it sort of on a trip-by-trip basis. And if you publish it automatically, you can also turn that off and make a trip private. And when we publish the data on a broad scale sort of network, let's say Facebook, etc., all we show are the trip dates and the location. So it's not very specific information about flights or the airline or anything like that. So it's high level enough where you can get people to sort of collaborate with you, give you advice, or just know that, you're going to be in Dallas, I'd love to hook up while you're there. Without divulging too much information that might make the user uncomfortable.
So does announcements, Apple's kind of continuing to push towards more and more location-based things. Does announcements and technology like that excite you guys? Does that open up some possibilities?
Oh, yeah. So for instance, with with Passbook. Okay, so we've been digging into that, and some people have mentioned, I think the press has talked about it as being a TripIt killer, when actually it is not at all. It's completely different, exactly. So we're super excited about it because we'd love to figure out a great way to leverage that, or make it easier for suppliers to book with us and leverage that.
Some sort of TripIt universal pass that ties into what everybody else is doing.
I mean, it's pretty early days, but I think we're excited about the developments. You know, Apple is great at innovation. They continue to innovate. And so it pushes the industry along. It's pushing us, which has been fabulous, I think. And so we're excited about the potential for the future. Leveraging location in a smarter way, life cycle. So lots to do, lots of good work.
What can businesses outside of the travel industry learn from some of the lessons that you found using, whether it be via the API, whether it be partnering with folks that you mentioned, one could be considered a competitor, but they're of course using your data and even dealing with the privacy issues and such. Do you think there's anything kind of other industries might be able to learn from what you guys have done?
Let's see. I think, I think in terms of mobile, let's say, or social location, I think because the travel industry was one of the first to sort of go online, and it's an older, sort of more established industry, we've paved the way for many other industries. So I would say, get mobile as quickly as possible. It's here, it's been here, and that's absolutely critical. Have the curated content that's relevant, make it easy for users. This is a computer in your pocket now, and it's always with you. But be smart about, in addition to the curated content, really consider what's the best way for your industry to leverage social. I think travel is naturally social, so we perhaps have more of an opportunity to do that, but think thoroughly about that. And then I think in terms of location and time, that is going to have a ton of relevance, especially as it's already out there, advertising, marketing offers, all that good stuff. There are a lot of ways that I think those industries can leverage the data to deliver value to users.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Nancy.
Yeah.
Ramamurthy.
Yes.
I got it right again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
All right. Nice meeting you.
So we are here talking with Irina Newman, and she is the mobile marketing manager over at Groupon, right?
That's right.
How are you doing?
Doing great. How are you guys?
We're doing good. We have a couple questions for you here. And how is Groupon, we're here at the Social Loco event, how's Groupon adapting to the shift towards social, local, mobile, the whole solo mo thing that's going on right now?
I think Groupon is, by nature of the type of platform it is, on the intersection of mobile, social, local, and commerce.
Okay.
And mobile is the glue that brings it all together. So Groupon basically is based on 4 fundamental steps. It's discovery, purchase, redemption, and then reward, right? And so in the past, like if you're a big brand, you need a whole IT system to figure out how you're going to bill people, how are you going to then reward them, United Airlines, rewards partner, all that. Groupon, with the power of mobile device application, allows the merchant to scan the redemption code. When you come and purchase multiple times with the same credit card, it tracks the rewards and then rewards you for loyalty. And as a user, you can discover and purchase on your mobile device, right? So this is pretty revolutionary. I think this is something that gets, doesn't get as much attention, that all of a sudden this very complex e-commerce cycle is available to, Bob's barbershop at their fingertips without having to spend millions in IT systems, without complex, barcode scanners, without, sophisticated CRM systems. It's available to them for free.
And you're saying that the mobile is the glue because it's with them throughout the entire process.
That's exactly right, because you can discover and purchase on mobile as a consumer, and then as a merchant, you can scan the barcode with the mobile merchant application. Like literally, you take a picture of a barcode with the app, and it goes into the system. And then on the rewards side, same thing. There's a tab in your consumer app that shows the rewards, and let's say you spend $30 out of 50 to unlock the $5 reward at Intelligentsia Coffee. It's very, very fundamental, and so I think for companies like Groupon, and I would venture to say any e-commerce company, mobile is the glue for social, local, and commerce that makes the seamless system work in a very beautiful and effective way.
Corey, do you have some questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned that it's great for some of these companies that traditionally can't do that type of marketing. How do companies like that get started? What's a good first step that they would take to get involved with something like Groupon to offer a deal?
Sure. First of all, you need to decide that this is the right approach for your business. But, prior to Groupon model existing, the promotional model for a small business was kind of publish a coupon in the paper and then wait and see. And so, on the one hand, you don't know how many customers are going to come in the store and take advantage of that coupon. You don't know how long it's going to take them. You are not able to predict sort of the revenue that you're expecting from that promotion. And the wait and see kind of manual model is not effective at all. With Groupon, what you're able to see within 24 to 48 hours, you're getting the benefit of getting that revenue up front, right? So people are buying Groupons right away.
Yep.
So you get the money in the bank up front, number one. Number two, you know exactly how many customers to expect in what, in a certain time period. Then you can reinvest that capital and grow in your business and just become that much more effective. But at the same time, you also need to factor in the revenue share that the merchant will give to Groupon in return for taking advantage of that service, and also kind of taking advantage of the power of the internet, really, where Mike's Cupcakes are able to reach thousands of people in that neighborhood literally overnight, where in the past that wasn't really feasible for small guys, right? With the Nordstroms and the Bloomingdales and others that had access to the complex internet promotional systems. But now Groupon goes out, and that basically everyone in your territory knows about that deal and that merchant. So to paraphrase, I think to get started, get in contact with the sales team, and they're really great in helping businesses evaluate if Groupon is the right solution for them, both from the scale point of view and also from the expected revenue and engagement point of view.
And what's one of the best kind of offers you've seen or marketing programs you've seen inside of the Groupon system?
Sure. So I look after mobile marketing, mobile user acquisition, and so a topic that's near and dear to me is how do you really bring offers to users wherever they are without forcing them to open the email or go into the app. And so the big idea, and I think the trend that's going to be emerging in mobile advertising in the next couple of years, is really connect mobile app to the API and to the data that you know about that impression, and make the ad look like an app. Because what we have right now in mobile advertising is a 300 by 50 banners or larger banners that really replica from the online days. It's not very intuitive, and let's face it, not that effective. But what is intuitive on the mobile devices is how we interact with apps. We like it, like to touch it. And so one of the things that we at Groupon are very excited about is taking our mobile advertising and making the ad units resemble our apps with codes, getaway tabs, and then if we know that you're from the zip code, make the deals appear through the API that are relevant for your zip code, and sort of kind of bring the deals to you, whether you're playing a game or listening to Pandora, And that approach, in my view, is ideal for any e-commerce or purchases that are impulse in nature.
You're talking about creating location-aware ads that are more engaging, is what you're meaning, right? So rather than say, like you said, I mean, we've talked about this actually on a couple of shows back, Corey, where we were saying that folks are talking about mobile advertising as being not engaging, not something that the average consumer wants to click on, and in fact, like you were saying, a smaller form factor of the traditional online advertising, which in many cases isn't as it's just not as popular. It's not as useful as it has been in the past.
Absolutely. And, we're bombarded with all kinds of marketing messaging. And so you have to earn the attention of your customer. And one of the ways to do it is to offer a two-way communication. So not only me saying, here's a static banner, click on it. It's like, why do I need to click on it? It doesn't look appealing. What if you were to say, hey, here's a dynamic banner. Please choose one of the three options that are interesting to you. Deals under 50, expiring fastest, and most popular. And then, okay, or let's say for him, right? So I'm price sensitive. I'm curious what deals are in my neighborhood under 50. And you interact with the ad unit, and then I think as a consumer, you just feel that much more engaged. And, frankly, heard by the brand or by the advertiser by being able to interact with that.
Now, you kind of mentioned earlier, you said, about how a business might get ready for doing an initiative like what Groupon offers. So are there circumstances where, a business might not just be ready at a particular time and needs to think about a few things internally instead of just saying, well, we're ready for more business. Well, what does that mean to be ready for the increase potentially in business that you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So from the point of view of a small business or a merchant, if you're a CEO of a small business, you need to look at Groupon as one of the marketing channels for user acquisition. Right, and there are many. You can advertise on the radio, you can have an ad in the newsfeed, or et cetera, you can have a Groupon. There's cost associated with driving each user. And so what I would say, you never want to be in a situation where you're 5-bedroom bed and breakfast, and you go and do a Groupon, and then you have 1,000-car line outside the door. This just creates a poor experience for everyone and just a stressful situation.
Yeah.
So what Groupon got better at is really managing the quantity of Groupons sold, so that when Groupon get activated, then the bed and breakfast is not stressed out and the customers have good experience. But if you are a bed and breakfast, perhaps you don't want to have, and you have 5 bedrooms, perhaps you don't want to reach, 7 million users overnight. Perhaps as a marketer, you want to look at other channels. That would be my general answer. And so I think,
and folks can kind of work around that by, like you said, maybe potentially talking to you guys, because part of what Groupon has to offer is actual people there to consult and kind of feel out what's the best offer for that particular business, right?
Absolutely. And over time, we've done this for so long that our sales teams are looking at complex quantitative models to really let you know what would be the optimal strategy for your business in terms of timeline, quantity of Groupons, and pricing. So definitely got it down to a science.
Good.
All right, the science of mobile, I like that. Cool. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode. And I think we really appreciate the information you shared. It sounds like Groupon's doing some exciting things.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, so we actually have one more topic that we're going to dive into, Adam. You said the tool review in the lightning round, but we did want to cover Foursquare, and we can keep this one kind of quick. But part of why we wanted to talk about this is we were we were aware that some big Foursquare changes were coming, but we couldn't really talk about it because we had heard from Food Spotting that Food Spotting was going to be doing some additional integration into the Foursquare system, and then we got a call from Food Spotting, and they were like, oh, we weren't exactly supposed to share that just yet, so we had to pull that interview. That interview is actually available now. Again, it's on our YouTube page, but we're going to be releasing that as a special edition of the Solo Mo show. So by the time you hear that, the special edition should be live. I'm going to be actually pushing it live tomorrow, but you can hear our interview with Alexa, the co-founder of Food Spotting, and a lot of interesting information about Food Spotting specifically. But one of the things she mentioned was that they had a deeper integration with Foursquare coming up, and Foursquare actually formally announced a really interesting platform, in my opinion, and I think, a continued shift in what Foursquare aims to be. And so I thought we would touch on it, at least a little bit and talk about some of the implications it has for businesses, because I think, it does kind of indicate the shift that Foursquare is making and how they want businesses to be interacting with and, potentially marketing to their audience. So what they announced is a platform for connected apps, and they started out with just a couple. They launched with things like Food Spotting, Untapped, which is a beer check-in service. They've actually partnered with the Weather Channel for one of their applications. And so what it's doing is it's actually gathering data from these connected apps, and it's connecting it to check-ins that users are doing. So when you check into a venue on Foursquare, it's going to look for applications that you've authorized that have related data. So let's say you check into a bar, and some of your Facebook friends who also use Untapped have tried beers that are available at that bar. Foursquare is going to be able to pull that information from Untapped and say, hey, here's 2 beers that we recommend you check out, courtesy of Untapped. Or another example is the first check-in of the day. They're actually going to give you the weather forecast from the Weather Channel. So they'll say, hey, thanks for checking in. Here's a preview of what the next 6 hours of weather looks like. And so they're really, doing what they can to become, again, a service that is more than just the check-in. They want to be an aggregator of a lot of useful information. And the Food Spotting one is especially interesting. So you check into a restaurant on Foursquare, and they can now show you specific dishes that your friends have tried. And this is, kind of similar to what Room 77 is doing. They're saying, hey, instead of just looking at specific restaurants, we'll show you specific rooms. Now Foursquare, via this Food Spotting integration, is saying, hey, we're not just going to recommend a restaurant, we're going to recommend specific dishes inside of this restaurant. So really interesting connection of a lot of data, and it's going to be exponentially growing. This is just the start. They just announced a couple of partners, but it's now an open platform. It's now out in the public, and so a lot of other applications can start to feed data into the Foursquare system. And again, it just leads to this idea that there's going to be a layer of data out there, and applications are going to be combining that data and using it in very interesting ways. So it's important to be aware of what data is out there about your business and make sure it's accurate and make sure it's portraying your business in the way that you'd like it to be portrayed. And, I think it's a really interesting shift in the way that we think about geolocation services.
I mean, we saw already Facebook make this move, right? And so Foursquare essentially is doing what Facebook's done, but with a very location-focused slant. And I think they're going to be successful at it. I mean, they've already launched with a bunch of partners, and that partnership will just grow. And so I think it's going to solidify its longevity as not just a product, but as a platform is going to be pretty solid.
I agree with that. I think that, especially with these moves, for a while I was a little worried about Foursquare, but I agree. I see them sticking around for a few years longer at least, because they're doing some very smart moves, and this is one of them. So a lot of good coming out of Foursquare, and definitely something to continue to pay attention to, because I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon.
So what's next, my man?
All right, let's dive into a quick tool review. So back into the world of Google, and specifically the world of Google+. So, we talked about in this episode a couple times, Google+, continue to pay attention to it. It's it's potentially growing. They're putting a lot of work towards continuing that growth. They're putting a lot of interesting tools out there. So let's say you're in the camp of, hey, I think this Google Plus thing could be something. I want to be prepared. What's the easiest way to stay connected to Google Plus? So the tool that we wanted to bring to light today is Google Plus notifications for Chrome. So this is going to be a little bit specific of a tool. You have to be a Chrome user first off, and you have to be, kind of active with your Google Plus usage. But if you check both of those boxes, if you use Chrome and you're trying to keep your Google Plus account up to date, I think this is a incredibly valuable tool. So what it does is it sticks a little Google Plus icon in the top menu bar of your Chrome browser window. And basically, anytime something happens on Google Plus, it's going to alert you. So it does things like tell you when you have new followers, tell you when somebody tags you in a photo, tells you when somebody tags you in a status update, tells you when somebody, messages to your circle. It basically automatically brings all of that content into your browser window. And what's really neat is you can then respond to it directly from this plugin. So you don't have to fire up Google Plus, find the thing, get distracted, spend a lot of time with it. You can keep your interactions very light, very easy, very quick, and keep your Google Plus account up to date and keep you as an active member of Google Plus without a significant time investment. You can stay focused on the things you need to stay focused on, but at the same time have a really good Google Plus account going. And I think this great tool for making that process simple, great tool for making that process easy, and it's made by Google. This is an extension that's going to work. They're going to fix the bugs. It's not something that some company's going to give up on a couple months from now. This is a Google product connecting to another Google product. It all lives inside of the Google system. So, I give this one a definite thumbs up if you're a Google Plus user.
I've been using it for a while, and it works as it's supposed to. It's not earth shattering, but it's definitely a heck of a lot better than checking in and out of Google Plus or having it open all the time. Quite honestly, it ends up being there in front of your face at all times. So if you are active and you are getting some engagement happening over in Google Plus, you'll it's definitely one of those that you should keep up there and install. And you said free and the whole nine, so it's kind of a win-win situation.
All righty, well, you know what that means, Adam. It is time for the lightning round.
Bum, bum, bum. All right.
So I am firing up the timer here because, as we have talked about before, the lightning round is a rapid-fire segment of our show where Adam and I each get 60 seconds to talk about 3 stories and try to both run down the story and give you our take on it in 60 seconds or less. And it's a little bit of a back and forth, so one of us will talk about the story, another person will respond, and that's it. We move on to the next topic. So hopefully a good way to cover a large amount of content in a short amount of time. So Adam, are you ready for the lightning round?
I stretched out before the show, and I'm ready.
All right. Don't want to get any cramps during the lightning round. That could significantly stall your time and take up precious seconds. All right, so you want me to start off with the first story here?
I will start off with the first one because I actually know about that story. The other 2 are fairly new to me, so I'll cover the first one.
Perfect. Timer is ready and go.
All right, so Google has their +1 button all over the web, of course, and that's going to their search engine and to Google+. And what they've done recently is upgrade their +1 button to also provide recommendations about other content on that current site that you're on that you might like. And so the interesting thing is it's helping to drive more consumption and discovery of content that you might have elsewhere on your site, primarily based on likely the +1 data that it has on those other posts as well. So I have not had the chance. I tried testing it out when I first when they first announced this, and I didn't see it happening when I first tried it out. But this sounds like a pretty awesome thing to be doing, and a great way to take something simple and kind of add some additional usage behind the +1 button.
Right on time. Well done. All right, timer is set for my response. Ready and go. All right, so I think this is actually really interesting, and it's focused on the blog, obviously. So it wouldn't really work well if you just got a single landing page or a store. But if you've got a blog, you're creating a lot of content, and people are giving +1s to that content. It's then trying to direct your audience for you to other content that they're going to find interesting, which is great. Google's doing your work for you. They're saying, hey, you liked this, you're probably also going to like that. As long as the user agrees, they're going to another page on your site, they're diving a little deeper. I think that part of it's great. The challenge I see is that it could potentially be used to drive traffic offsite. So they haven't explicitly said this, but right now they're saying, hey, we're going to show you 3 posts that you might like from within the site. But there is potentially the danger that they also show 2 posts from your site and 1 post from somebody else's site, and then you could lose traffic through it. But, for now, very cool, and I like what they're doing with this. All right, so 60 seconds on the clock. We will move on to story number 2. Ready and go. All right, so story number 2 is Google renaming their Places application for iOS to Google Plus Local, which also now includes Zagat scores and voice search in the app. So basically revamping their Google Places app, but I think the Zagat score inclusion is very interesting. So we mentioned this a little bit earlier in the show, but again, it's very important to understand what's happening with this data. So now, in addition to showing up on, Google Now, it's also starting to show up in Google's Places application, which is the application that a lot of people are going to use to find restaurants, find businesses. It's kind of Google's replacement for something like Foursquare. So very important to understand. I think, check out what's there and make sure that your business is being put in a positive light, because it's also iOS users. This isn't just something limited to the Android camp. All right, couple bonus seconds there. So Adam, what is your take on Google changing up their Places app? Ready, go.
So like you said, remember, this is not an Android app here. This is the iOS app. We already know that within the last month or so that they've changed Google Places to now be, so all Places pages are now part of Google Plus. So this kind of closes that loop in a way, and Google also bought, I thought it was Google, not Yelp. I think it was Google bought Zagat, right? And so this is, again, coming kind of full circle in that sense. And they're trying to make sure that they still have a relevant presence on the iOS device. And I mean, this all is kind of mirroring what's already happening over on the Google Plus pages as well. So, all in all, it's just kind of making sure that Google is making sure that they're present on more than just their Android devices and on the web.
4 bonus seconds. Very nicely done. All right, so we got 2 potential stories left. Do you want to do both of them, or do you want to pick one? What do you say?
I think we should have mercy on our listeners and pick one.
All right, so it's either PopCap and Wooga pulling games from Google Plus, or Instagram.
Let's do the Instagram one. That's pretty straightforward and simple, but interesting. It's non-Googly, so we can.
All right,
get off the Google thing here.
We're venturing away from the world of Google. All right, 60 seconds on the clock, and I will run through the Instagram photo pages story. Ready, go. So Instagram photo pages, again, not a significant change, but what they've done is revamped the way that you view Instagram photos on the web. So it used to be, and they were kind of notorious for this, you'd say, hey, check out my Instagram picture, and it had a little link, and you'd go there, and all you could do is view the photo. You couldn't like it, you couldn't comment on it, you couldn't do anything. And suddenly, like, unannounced overnight, they say, hey, we got this new photo page, and you go there, and you can now log into Instagram from that page. You can like photos, you can add comments, which is huge. Now you don't have to fire up the Instagram app, you can comment right from the application. But what I think is most interesting for this audience specifically is that you can now follow users from Instagram.com. So you see a photo, you like it, you can just go to the top left, click on that user's name. As long as you're logged in, you can then follow that user, and now you're in that user's list of followers. You're going to get all their new photos, it's going to go sync to the mobile app. It's robbed. It's you'll never know. All right, Adam, what's your take on Instagram's photo pages in 60 seconds or less? Ready, go.
So they're really not doing much more or less per se than say TwitPic and some of the other Twitter image services that have been out there for quite some time. But the difference obviously is that they're really tightly integrated. I mean, just like the others with Twitter, and they've got tons and tons of users on their own. Nobody uses like TwitPic by itself without using Twitter, but plenty of people use Instagram by itself. And so, of course, the ability to have a conversation now on these kind of landing pages of images is going to allow people to discover Instagram more and discover your content more without kind of being locked out from being engaged with you. And the ability to follow is really interesting. I didn't even know that Instagram had their own account on Instagram, and therefore when I saw this announcements, I was actually able to follow them directly from the page. So I think it's it's not revolutionary, but it's very cool, and it's about time that Instagram did that.
Whew, right on the buzzer. Well done.
You'd think we'd be able to do a shorter show if we just found a way to like train ourselves to stick with like 1 minute or 2 minute increments for the other things. Huh?
There you go. All right, we'll jump back in time, and I challenge you to discuss the Nexus 7 tablet and all its complexities in 60 seconds or less.
I know. All right, fair enough.
I think it'd be interesting to watch. Maybe we'll do a little experiment and see if we can do an entire show in 60-second segments and see what that would come out like. All right, well, with that, we will wrap up this hopefully enlightening, educating, useful, Google-focused show. So, as always, we want to thank the audience. We are incredibly appreciative of everybody that listens to the show. We hope that you get some value out of it, and, we appreciate the time that you give us each week in order to, have this discussion and talk about marketing, talk about advertising, and geek out about the things that we like to geek out about. So we're thankful for you tuning in, and a special shout out to those that do tune in to the Google Plus on-air hangout. We appreciate the support for the live show, and hope you get value of the raw and uncut feed as well. If we had one request to make, it would be that you rate us in iTunes. So, especially with the new podcast app coming out for iOS, iTunes and their podcast world is becoming more and more important for people finding new shows to listen to. And they do that by looking for shows that are highly rated. So, if you like the show, take a quick 60-second break out of your day, head on over, search for Solo Mo Show on iTunes, and give it a rating. We would greatly appreciate that.
Please.
And, we're always open. We're here to help. So if you have questions, if you want to suggest topics, if you want to give us feedback, or even if you just want to say hi, we highly encourage you to get in touch. The easiest way to do that would be via Twitter. We're available at Solo Mo Show, or I'm available directly. I'm at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi. You can also reach us via email at this Solomo Show at gmail.com, and also connect with us on our various social networks. Your Solomo Show page is on Facebook for you to find us, on Google Plus, and we also have a pin board on Pinterest.
There you go. And as always, all of the links that we discussed today, including things like the Google Plus Chrome extension, you can find those links in our show notes. And the show notes can be found either by going to solomoshow.com, or we also post them on all of the social channels that we just discussed. So they're available on YouTube, they're available on Facebook, they're available on Google Plus, they're available everywhere you can find the show.
Show notes everywhere!
So we do encourage you to check those out. You can actually open those up as you listen to it, check out the things that we're talking about, and dive deeper and form your own opinions, and, feel free to share those opinions. If you read the story that we're talking about and you think we're full of crap and you have a totally different opinion on it, send that to us and we'll talk about that on
Send that to Corey O'Brien on Twitter.
There we go. Send that my way on Twitter. I would happily receive that. So that should be available again either at solomoshow.com or in the podcast player of choice, except for Apple's podcast app. But we're going to see if we can find a workaround for that. And with that, we will bid you adieu and see you guys next week.
Take care.